Um, Thank you for everybody. My name is Marty Healy. I'm the chair of the Main Street Design Working Group. And folks may or may not know, and this is for the TV as well. We were appointed a little under 2 years ago by the Board of Selectmen and had a both a broad and a narrow mandate. And that was to look at the proposed Main Street project from as objective a perspective as possible. The selectmen, I think, did a very good job of selecting, not because they selected me and others, but people who came from various neighborhoods around the town and with different perspectives. You might remember there was a vote for an article at town meeting just about 2 years ago that related to this project, and it was a very close vote in terms of it was a vote that might have stopped the project in its tracks. And I don't know exactly who voted which way, but the result, the appointments, I think, reflected people who were both in favor of and skeptical of, or maybe even opposed to the project. And I have to say, I was one of the people who was very skeptical at the outset about what were the benefits of the project. And on the one hand, it's a project that was going to be paid for by the state in large part, although there'll be some cost to the town, and so that's always a benefit. But again, I was very skeptical, and so we, 7 of us, embarked on a journey to look at the project from as many different perspectives as we could, and come up with recommendations. And those, I mean, we weren't bound in any way. Those recommendations could have been, this doesn't make any sense at all. Those recommendations could have been that the project as is makes absolutely perfect sense, or something in between. And what we ended up doing is something in between. At least I think so. So we are nearing the end of a pretty important stage in the project. And that is the 75 right-of-way plan. And what we did starting out is we literally, the plan, the proposed project starts at approximately Sears Road on Main Street and goes to approximately Park Street. And we started on the west end and worked our way block by block, street by street, and solicited concerns, solicited input, solicited positives, solicited negatives from people about what they thought about various proposals, other proposals that they might have. We solicited input from the engineering consultants that the town had hired, obviously from the DPW, from the fire department, from the police department. And I think what you'll hear throughout this is safety concerns were a particularly important part of it. And we had the good fortune to have John Boland, who used to be the DPW supervisor in town for a lot of years, to help us in the process as well. And what's important about 75% is at the 25% stage, you're very early in the process, and things are not hardened, they're not set in stone in terms of what the project ultimately will look like. There's a general outline, and that's kind of where we stepped in a couple of years ago. Through the process, we came up with various recommendations to the Board of Selectmen and made those, oh boy, it was a little over a year ago. And the Board of Selectmen said, fine, they accepted many of them. They adjusted some of them. I'm not sure if they rejected any outright, although they may have, and said go back, not to the beginning, but to the drawing board and see if you can improve on what the work you've done. And we did hopefully improve, but we certainly worked on it. And we got to what is important in the process. It's states funds that are involved, federal funds that are involved. And so on their guidelines and requirements, there's a 75% stage. And that means you're nearing finality in what the project will look like. And that's where we are now. We're at the 75% stage, and the documentation for that has been submitted to the state, and there's various reviews that go on at the State Department of Transportation level, at the federal level, environmental level, and the like. And one of the important parts of that, and the reason people who are abutters have been receiving communications, is that not unexpectedly, with any project there is going to be disruption during the course of construction. And so to deal with that disruption, there are what are called easements, which are minor property takings. And there are both, for this project, there are both temporary and permanent easements that are part of it. And they allow, most of them are temporary, and we'll get to that in a second, that allow for the construction to go forward. The permanent easements are, for the most part, utility easements. They have to do with power lines and the like. So we're at the 75% stage. There's a project, I'll go walk through that a little bit, that is laid out here. The engineering drawings are all done. Hopefully folks have received the federal aid guide for property owners. If they're not, it's available and can be gotten tonight. Do we have copies tonight? Okay. We'll talk about the process for easements, which start with town meeting, which is about a little under 2 weeks away now. And then we've got the engineers and the DPW here tonight for any property owners who have any specific questions about how their properties might be affected by the construction easements or the permanent easements that might be necessary, and then any public comment. So when this process started for us anyway, there was the 25% plan, and there were drawings for that. As part of our process, and both the initial process and going back after we made our presentation and recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, there have been some changes in it. And they relate to, first I'll just go through them very quickly, the Park Street intersection, which is down near the center of town near Morrow's Market, an additional sidewalk that is right outside the library, north, going along where the parking is. From the original drawing, some additional parking west of Middle Road. Some revisions to the drainage design on Parkerville Road. Actually kind of a cool thing, the Henry Knox Memorial Landscaping, and kind of highlighting that. It's kind of a big deal in town that 200 and whatever it is now, 40 years ago, a pretty important event took place here from the Revolutionary War. And the fact that there are 50 additional tree plantings, it almost, for every tree we're losing, we're almost replacing 2 as part of the project. So let's talk about Park Street. And as I said earlier, one of the absolute driving forces in our review and our recommendations has to do with safety. And so what's been done with Park Street, it's not major, but it's important, is that the intersection has been softened. And the hope of that from a safety perspective is that this does not become, or this is no longer a roadway for cars being able to pull. One of the concerns, quite frankly, at the time was the trucking issue with Ted's trucks there. They're not there anymore, but there still is auto service there, and there's at least some, not as much as there used to be, some heavy traffic going from Main Street onto Park Street. And so the intersection is softened a little bit in terms of the way you turn from Main Street onto Park Street, particularly going east. Anything else I should talk about there? Okay. Changes at Route 85. It always was, as part of the plans, obviously, left-hand turn lanes going in all 4 of the directions. It was interesting. One of the, and I actually think that it's a necessary focus, but I think that we got off track a little bit. The focus of the intersection initially, and legitimately, there were traffic studies that were done for the impact that the changes to the intersection, and it's widened. There's no question about that. The effect it will have on traffic, because obviously that's one of the things that's concerned here. There's an awful lot of traffic, particularly during rush hours, at that intersection. And there was an awful lot of discussion during our meetings about what the exact impact would be, from the 6:30 to 8:30 in the morning, 4:30 to 6:30, however you want to define rush hour. And that's particularly important, and there are some benefits to having left-hand turn lanes. It's weird, they're not as obvious as you think they would be. You'd think that they might cut down the wait time by a factor of 50% or something. They don't. They do cut it down somewhere, I think, in about the 30% range, depending on the study we look at. But the most important thing, I think, and part of our discussions for that intersection, anybody who drives through it, particularly at rush hour, it's incredibly unsafe. I mean, we've been lucky, I think, that we haven't had some sort of major accident already. Because, and I take this turn a lot, as you're inching to try to take the left-hand turn, people are going by you on the right. You're trying to gauge the traffic to take your left-hand turn. And what this will do, it'll have dedicated left-hand turn lanes in all four of the directions with signaling. And on the one hand, we'll make it, we'll have, as I said, in the 30% range. That might lessen over time depending on what the volume of traffic is. Benefit from a traffic standpoint, it'll have an enormous benefit from a safety standpoint. Anything else on that? And the other thing we did is we softened, we shrunk the intersection as much as we could from a safety standpoint. I'm sorry?
The sidewalks would have been more conservative.
Right. We shrunk the intersection as much as we could from a safety standpoint. And again, we got a great deal of input from the fire department, and in some respects benefited from the fact that we didn't have to consider some of the larger trucks that used to go through there from TEDS. But from a safety standpoint, with fire engines going through there, you can only limit it so much. The other thing that we added is, you can see here, there now are sidewalks going up on, excuse me.
The middle one.
The middle one. Sidewalks going up, as I said, on the library side, on the west side of Route 85 going north of the library. I mean, the idea is pie in the sky that ultimately that can go up to some neighborhoods there. That can't be done as part of this project. We can only extend so far. And the other thing is, obviously, there already are sidewalks on the west side of 85, south of Route 30. This will add a sidewalk on the east side going from Main Street down to the Woodward School. Changes at the town common. There will be a sidewalk, obviously, all along here. Sidewalks extending pretty much all the way on the south side of the road from Sears Road down to Park Street. And what that'll mean from the Park Street to Route 85 section is there'll be sidewalk. There'll no longer be that sort of ad hoc parking ability on where there is kind of a sidewalk, but there really isn't. The same thing will be true from the Fay School going all the way to Sears Road. The only difference will be from Fay School to the Route 85 intersection. There are two businesses there. There's the funeral home there, and there's Dr. Stone's business there. And there are parking spaces that are retained there. There are fewer than there are now, and the reason there are fewer than there are now is from a safety perspective. This also is a dangerous intersection. And I mean, I personally know a couple of people who've been hit, one on a bike, one on a pedestrian at that intersection. We looked at it and maintained as much parking as we possibly could at that intersection, keeping it safe. And that's based on state and federal guidelines for sight lines and the like. The other thing that's being done at the, and this is the current plan. The other thing that's being done, so there's parking that starts a little bit after the Stone business and extends all the way up to the Fay School, and there's parking that starts after a jutting out here at the corner of Middle Road and Main Street, and continues down towards, it doesn't go all the way to Route 85, again, for a safety perspective. You just can't for sight lines and the like. You literally cannot get state and federal funding for a project like this and have an unsafe intersection. And having, not putting in the buffers there at the corner would create an unsafe intersection. It's actually unsafe right now. Project timeline, again, I've talked about the past. That's all the work that's been done by an awful lot of people in town to get us where we are now. The next step, other than tonight, which is talking with the abutters and the like, is town meeting. And at town meeting, there will be a warrant article. And that warrant article will give the Board of Selectmen authority to discuss the specifics of easements with residents. And there are basically three ways for property takings, which an easement is, to be gotten. One is gift. If it's particularly minor, that's something that someone might consider doing, or even if it's major, they consider doing it. The second is an agreed upon price for an easement. And the third is, if given the authority by town meeting, the Board of Selectmen would have the ability by eminent domain to take the necessary easement. So what this warrant article would do at town meeting is authorize the Board of Selectmen to engage in discussions with residents, but also authorize them to have the power to either accept easements by gift, purchase easements in a arm's length transaction through negotiation, or begin the process for taking the easement by eminent domain, in which case the landowner doesn't have the ability to stop that easement from happening, but is by statutory and constitutional right, they get compensated for that. Not a whole lot different than the arm's length transaction, except it's a one-sided decision to take the easement, and then it's ultimately could be a judicial determination after an appraisal as to what the property owner gets in return for that. So hopefully the residents on the list, the abutters, have been notified. We had one meeting on March 10th. This is the second one. I saw folks nodding, so presumably the federal aid acquisition guide, which is pretty straightforward, has been provided, or if it's not, it's available now. And for folks who are watching, it is available at the library in the townhouse.
It's online.
And it's also online through the town website. And then ultimately, the next step, as I said, will be a warrant article at town meeting. So the land acquisition process. I mean, we're talking about private property rights, and so there is a long-standing process for the way that an easement, in this case, that's what we're talking about, not any actual land takings, but the private property right that an easement is can be acquired by in this instance, a municipal entity. And the interesting thing is, I know there haven't been any discussions with any landowners by the Board of Selectmen or other representatives of town about what, for instance, the pricing might be, what the appraised value might be of the particular easement. And one of the oddities of again, we're dealing with state regs and statutory requirements, federal regs and statutory requirements. One of the rules is the town can't do that until the Board of Selectmen are authorized to engage in the process of acquiring easements. So that process can be done if and when town meeting authorizes the warrant article and gives that authority to the Board of Selectmen. When that happens, the first thing that's done is appraisals of what the particular easement is worth. Those appraisals are reviewed by the Department of Transportation, who is from soup to nuts involved in this project, and again making sure that state and federal regulations are adhered to. Proposals are then sent to the property owners, and the property owners have 30 days to review, submit questions and answers, effectively engaged in a give and take, potentially even a negotiation. Many of the easements are temporary, as a result, it strikes me anyway that it's a much more straightforward process, because you're talking about compensation for a narrow particular period of time. The permanent easements, for the most part, and again, we have folks from the Department of Public Works here tonight. They're available through the Department of Public Works if folks aren't able to be here tonight to answer questions about exactly whether it's a temporary easement that you're involved with. That'll be communicated to you as well through the notification process, and also what exactly both the temporary or the permanent easement would entail. All right. I said this a number of different times. No actual land takings are required for this project. Nobody is going to lose any of their property as part of it. But property, that's why we're talking easements, is going to be affected. So temporary easements are very simply easements that are required for some portion of the duration of the project. And it can be because a construction vehicle has to, in order to do the construction, has to be on somebody's property. It can be because in order to do the construction, you have to encroach initially on somebody's property. It can be because there's a stone wall, and in order to do the construction, the stone wall has to be moved or affected in some way. And it can do with trees. Some trees will have to come down as part of this project. As I said earlier, for every tree that comes down, 2 are going to be replaced. And it doesn't mean that a tree is going to go in the exact location, although it might. But the net of this, obviously there's some mature trees that will be lost, but the net of this is that there'll be more trees rather than fewer at the end of the process. Permanent easements take a variety of different forms. I talked an awful lot about safety. The safety isn't simply driving and sight lines and things like that. For pretty much the entire length of the project, one of the things this is going to do is it's going to create very specific buffers between the roadway and the sidewalks. And again, that's part of the. I mean, it's a very strong initiative on both the state and the federal level, and that is for uses other than cars on roadways. And this is going to make that stretch of Route 30 anyway much safer for bicyclists. The other part of the safety feature, and quite frankly the use feature, is the requirement for Americans and Disabilities Act. And so at every intersection there has to be, it makes for a bigger footprint. At the particular corner, it makes for a larger footprint because you have to take into consideration the ramps that you need for the sidewalks for people with whatever form of disability are able to access the sidewalks, obviously much better than they can now, and particularly for the areas where there are no sidewalks now, and oftentimes there are cars parked and make it impossible for access and egress along Main Street for people with disabilities. So that's one of the permanent easements that will be necessary. It just requires some encroachment on some private property for purposes of the ramps themselves. In some, I think it's a pretty limited number, there are some permanent easements that are required from a roadway perspective. And if you're informed that it impacts you, that's something from an engineering standpoint you should talk to the DPW and the town's consulting engineers about. Easements exist up in the air as well. And so there are some, because of utility impacts that the project has, there are some utility permanent easements that are going to be necessary. Again, those are things that are very specific, very easement specific, very property specific. And if you're notified that that's something that's going to impact you, that's something you should talk to the engineers and the DPW about. They are, I don't want to say, because I'm not a property owner that's affected by this, I don't want to say that they're minor, but I suspect that when you talk, you'll realize that we're not talking about moving substantial wiring or anything like that. It's just the fact that it's on your property, it is affected, and as a result, it creates an easement. And the final thing is just in some areas, pretty limited number, there is some drainage, and one of those obviously is only the one, and that's at Parkerville and Route 30. There's one drainage easement, and that's part of the project. It's right now the runoff from storms, from snow melting and the like, finds its way into groundwater without any sort of treatment, without any sort of affecting. There's a drainage easement. There's a series of grassy pods that are going to be done along the west side of Parkerville Road, right below, I guess it is, Route 30, that will take care of that. And the runoff will enter into the groundwater and into the creeks and the reservoirs having been treated. Well, that's not the case now. This is, for the most part, this is just to show that for the most part the easements are temporary, to the extent they're permanent, they fall into two categories primarily, and that's utility easement and sidewalk or roadway easement. I'm not going to get in a whole lot of detail because honestly, I don't think individual abutters really care about the fact that what happens to other people's property. You're going to be interested in what happens to your property and what the easement process is for that. I can't cover that specifically here. That's something that to the extent you have concerns, to the extent you have questions, you should ask them, you should focus on them, you should talk to folks either here tonight or again, folks watching on the television. Track down the DPW, track down the town's consulting engineers through the DPW and get those questions answered. Again, you'll see an awful lot of the individual homeowners are clearly affected by this, folks who live along the footprint of the project. A big part of the effect is on the Faith School, Pilgrim Church, St. Mark's Church, St. Mark's, and the town and the library obviously are also going to be affected by this. And again, that's interesting from a sort of general perspective, but folks are interested in how it affects their individual property. Focus in on that when you have your questions and otherwise. Temporary easements of 67 or 122. And Karen, correct me, have people been advised of the particular easements that impact their property? Has that been included in the communications?
No.
Okay.
Only when they talk to us.
Okay. So if you've been contacted here and out there, you have your property is going to be affected by easement. To get the answers about exactly what the specifics are, again, we can't get into a valuation discussion yet, but please, I encourage you to reach out to the Department of Public Works and get your questions answered. But again, 80% of the easements in terms of land area are temporary easements, which means they are going to be easements during the process of construction.
I think he's trying to show that how they had enrollment.
Okay, and again, and I said this earlier, not with specifics, but any temporary easement that impacts people's property. If a stone wall is affected during the course of construction, that's going to be put together at least the way it was. Knock on wood, hopefully even better. Any sort of effect on edges of lawns because of the way construction is going to push on, reseeding will be done for that. That's all part of the project. First do no harm, and that is the mantra of the project. That any temporary easements that adversely affects people's property will be you'll be compensated for the easement. Secondly, the property will be put back in the shape that it was. And that's just what I said. You're required to put it back in the shape that it was. I jumped ahead of myself. Permanent easements, that's 32 out of 122, but only 9% of the total land easement. And again, as I said earlier, that has to do with ADA compliance. It has to do with the nature of the sidewalks, and in some minor instances because of the road specifications to hit state and federal requirements. I think this picture here is an example. Basically, that's a utility easement. I mean, the fact that we have them all over town already, whether it's a pole itself or support for a pole or other wiring, that's a utility easement that's required on people's property. It's because it's permanent. It's going to be there as long as the electrical facilities or other utility facilities are there. It's a permanent easement as opposed to something temporary. This I already talked about a little bit. There's one drainage permanent easement. I think it's the largest easement in the project, is it not? Yeah. It's what I described earlier. It starts pretty much flush with the what will be a sidewalk at the the west side of the Parkerville Route 30 Main Street intersection, and extends approximately how many feet, Karen? Up Parkerville. A couple hundred feet, and again, it is to create a drainage treatment process for the runoff that is at the slope at the bottom of Parkerville and Main Street. I talked about this earlier. The easement acquisition process is step one. the town meeting has to be a 2/3 vote, has to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire the easements. Once that is done, negotiations can take place, and the town, following, again, state and federal guidelines, can begin either through the gifting process, through the arm's length transaction process, or the ultimately an eminent domain process to appraise, value, and compensate landowners who are affected by the easement process. I jumped ahead through all of this. Again, all of this is interesting. It's regulatory. The bottom line is, if your property is affected by an easement, there are, and I know I'm repeating myself, but there are 3 ways that easement can be acquired by the town. You can choose, because it's so minor or otherwise, to gift it to the town. The second way is through an arm's length negotiation that starts with an appraisal that is communicated to you. The third way is with an appraisal that's communicated to you that, for whatever reason, you choose not to accept. The selectmen are authorized to proceed to acquire that easement through an eminent domain process. That doesn't mean you don't get compensated. It means you get compensated not as a result of an agreed upon transaction, but as a result of a statutory process, and that ultimately, if the compensation doesn't satisfy you, can be litigated in court. This explains the easement distribution. Again, not surprisingly, particularly for construction easements, they extend for the length of the project. To the extent your odds are, if you are in a butter, if you live on Main Street between Sears Road and Park Street, your property is going to be affected by at least a temporary construction easement. Is there any property that is not, Karen? No. And the specifics of what those easements are, and whether or not the temporary easements also include a permanent easement, is something you need to focus on with the Department of Public Works and our engineers. All right, what did I say? 15 minutes? I apologize, a little bit longer than that, maybe 25. I'm happy to answer any questions about the process and otherwise. I will tell you, I'm not a technical person. Certainly not an engineer. The engineers and DPW will be here after the meeting, and you're happy to ask questions to me and I can direct them to them, or you're happy to get non-technical questions out of the way with me, and then Brian, Karen are here to answer any specific questions you might have about your own property or otherwise. So non-technical questions I'm happy to field.
Thank you, Marty. That was very clear.
Good. Yeah.
I don't know if it was mentioned on the PowerPoint. When are you planning for this to start?
Good point. I didn't mention that. The anticipated, hoped for timeline is that requests for proposal, what do they call them? Requests for bids would go out sometime in the November-December timeframe. Because even as this process is going on, the easement process, the town meeting approval process, the final design, dotting of I's and crossing of T's that's going on, there are reviews that are going on at the town level, at the state level, at the federal level. Again, there are a ton of various regulatory and statutory requirements that have to, from an environmental standpoint, from a historical standpoint, and otherwise. And there's also a process for the acquisition of the easements. And the hope is, with approval by the town meeting in April, if that happens, and the other processes going forward, that can all be taken care of in a 3 to 4 month time frame with some buffer built in, that will be ready to go for requests for bids sometime in the November-December time frame, which means construction would likely be able to start sometime in the late spring to early summer of 2017.
Thank you.
How long is this expected to last? How long is the construction will take?
2 summers.
Or 2 construction seasons. Construction usually starts in March and goes to November. So it will take the amount of work that we have. It's going to take 2 construction seasons.
And And Brian, correct me, will it be, in other words, will the entire project be worked on at one time, or will it be, in other words, will the work on the project be sort of the way we did our review and start at one end and move? So in other words, if you're a property owner, wherever you are geographically, you're not going to be affected for that entire time. Or am I wrong about that?
It all depends. I mean, they typically, they would do anything that has to be done underground first, like there's any drainage work that has to be done, or any sewer or water work. That would be done first, so that when it's backfilled and there's temporary asphalt put on it, it gives it a chance to settle. So they probably do that first, but then they would do the paving of the roadway last. But in between, they would do all the sidewalk and the curbing. And, I mean, we can actually even specify it in the documents that go to the contract that, look, you can only work on it so much at a time, like the downtown area.
Okay, so the answer is that you're not going to be affected by the entire time, and in some respects, you might even be able to give an estimate of where you would fall in the project, and as a result, when you might be affected.
Yes, because the contractor is required, mandated to have the schedule of what the work is supposed to be, and give that to the department, and there'll be a resident engineer from that DOT on site. So if any individual or property owner says, hey, when are they going to be on my street? When are they going to be in front of my house? The resident should know that answer.
Okay, so I don't want to overstate, but it's likely to be a construction season process. But a particular landowner is going to be impacted, at least from a temporary easement standpoint, from a much narrower time frame than that.
Yes.
Okay, and should be able to find out to some extent anyway what the likely time frame is that they're going to be affected.
Yes.
Okay.
I think he said at the beginning too that it's not 100% funded by the state, so the town will be picking up part of that. Does that mean that the construction is also going to be done by one entity, or is it going to be part of it done by the state, part of it done by the private companies, where the town has to get involved with that private company?
Right, you're getting perilously close to a technical question, but
What will happen is that the project itself is 80% funded by the federal government, 20% funded by state government. And if there are any amenities that are on the project that are not typically funded, for example, if we're going to do some, say, water improvements, typically the department or the federal won't pay for that unless they're causing the problem. If we have some bad water lines out there, the Department of Public Works tells us that, and they would have to contribute some money to get that done. The other thing is that when it goes out to bid, the Department of Transportation is going to put it out to bid, and they will only get one major contractor who will do responsible for all the work. He may not do all the work by himself. He may be a roadway guy, right? He may not do curbing, so he may sub out curbing.
So
But there'll be one general contractor.
One general contractor and subcontractor.
And Mass DOT has the on-site guy. So the person that everyone contacts and talks to is a Mass DOT guy who will basically relay any issues to the contractor, make sure, we'll be there to help too, but the DOT guys are really the key.
and not holding anybody, but the amount of the likely amount of state and federal money that would be focused on this project is
$6 to $7 million.
$6 to $7 million. So the cost to the town for the sort of amenities we're talking about are, I mean, nothing's insignificant when you're talking about taxpayers' money, but is dwarfed by the funding that will come from the state and the federal government.
Has there been any discussions about upping projects so at the same time you could also maybe do something like putting electrical
There was, you know what? Do you take the subways? You know, there's that third rail, on the subway. We've seen that over there, and have occasionally sort of leaned towards it, but we've stayed away from it. And it's not you. If that gets done, it's a perfect. Believe me, it's crossed a lot of people's minds. But it is, if that gets done, it's not going to get done as part of this project.
Right, because it just seems like everything's going to be torn up. It'd be cheaper to do it at this point than in the future.
There's that third rail over there, though. Yeah, it's not part of this project, and it's not contemplated that it's going to be part of this project. But very good question. All right, any other non-technical questions? Mr. Phillips, a member of our committee.
Is this an appropriate time for a comment on the project as a whole, rather than on specific questions, or?
I guess.
Thanks. I wonder, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Phillips, 26 Main Street. I'm a member of I'm an abutter to the project, and also have been a member of the Main Street Working Group considering the project. This project's going to bring a lot of change to town when it comes in, and at this point it seems to be moving forward, and this change, there's a lot of momentum for this project, and it's moving forward. I'm concerned that at this point there's one major flaw that makes me have concerns about whether this project is ready for approval at town meeting. The issue is that while most of the impacts on this project are not serious to properties, the one real exception is south of the Common. The road has to widen there at the Common, and because we wanted to preserve as much of the Common as possible, the Common itself is only moved north a couple of feet, and the properties at the south are impacted by this. There's three properties in particular, one that's owned by Susan Stone and two that are owned by the Morrises. Two of these properties are businesses, and the third one is a rental property. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, please, but is that the rental property there at 36 Main Street is going to lose its front driveway along with the parking that's out there. It has a very short driveway, and so there, I mean, in the discussions, yeah, it might be worth taking a look at this stuff, but in the discussions that are going on, it appears that you have the funeral home that needs to replace parking because parking is disappearing from Main Street. Just as an aside, I went over to the community house for the Burnett, the great presentation on the Burnett mansion, and there were 16 cars parked along Main Street for that presentation, which will not be able to park here after this project is done. So the two businesses there have a lot of pressure on their because of the road moving south and because of parking spaces going, and also this is going to severely impact the rental property and probably cause them to lose at least one unit along, and I don't know how you can rent a place that has no parking in this town. I think if this article is approved at town meeting, what we're doing is giving the selectmen approval to go ahead and pursue acquisition of this land by whatever means is necessary. They hope it's friendly, but if it's not friendly, then it goes to eminent domain. I know the Main Street Working Group and the selectmen have both talked a lot to the specific abutters, but I don't think really a solution has arisen that doesn't cause these abutters a lot of financial and concerns, and that which really dwarf, to me, it seems like the amount that they could expect to get from the easement process. So I think as a town we need to ask ourselves, and the other part of this is that once we approve this at town meeting, then whatever leverage we had with the state to try to work out improvements to mitigate the impact on these abutters goes away, because the state can say, well, the voters of town told you take the piece by eminent domain. So really, over the course of this project, I've come to accept that the good things that this brings, and I hope that will outweigh the other sides of the change here. But I think that really, as a town, we owe it to ourselves. If this is such a good idea, I don't think it's right that a few abutters should disproportionately suffer financially. I believe that because of that, to me, it seems premature to give this blanket authority at town meeting where we now say, go ahead and take this property by eminent domain. If this was my property, I would be incensed at the idea that I was losing business and losing money, and that I was the one paying the price for this project. So I guess I don't know the solutions to these issues. They're still issues because they're hard problems. But I think that as a town, we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we've explored every option to make this project work for for everybody, including these three abutters, which to me seem like the most affected negatively from this project. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. The minority view on the Main Street Design Working Group. It's not worth a back and forth here, but as I said, the recommendations by the working group are driven by safety concerns, and there literally is nothing you can do with that intersection at Middle Road and Main Street other than a wholesale change in the Main Street area there, which the state wouldn't pay for. But from a safety perspective, the recommendations of the working group are to actually grant parking for those businesses that doesn't exist anywhere else on Main Street under this project. So it's not that some people are being treated unfairly. They actually are being treated more fairly than the rest of the project. And the idea that not enough parking spaces are going to be maintained from the ones that exist now without sidewalks is, from a recommendation standpoint, the result of safety considerations. Yes.
So I know this is a hearing and I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I'm Louise Clark of 18 Main Street and I've lived there since 1970.
Where is 18 Main Street so that I can have some bearings?
18 Main Street is across from where you come out of the dentist's office.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes. And I'm okay with this project. I'm a walker. And so I like sidewalks, I like safe intersections, I like to be able to cross the roads. So I'm okay with it.
Okay.
You're going to take my pushes, but Karen says she'll put some others in after that. But I really, the street in front of the house, the car practically tips when it's going down. And we're on the side that doesn't have a real sidewalk, it's flush with the street. And I'm tired of the neighbors who park on the sidewalk. I used to complain about the one who parked the wrong way in the sidewalk. He doesn't live there anymore. But there are still people who park, you can't see, you drive out your driveway. I would like it just to be able to see. I understand that some people will lose. I hope the person who owns the rental property doesn't really lose tenants and driveway because of it. But I would just like to see a safer, even though it'll be a little bigger and whatever.
Great. And one of the things that was a big part of our discussions, it is, for better or worse, it's not something you think of. I mean, walking from Route 85 down to Park Street, which is the east of 85 part of this project. I'm not so young, but healthy, ambulatory, and there are always cars parked along there, and I can navigate it. If you're handicapped, we're denying the handicapped population of Southborough and visitors to Southborough, access to a large part of our Main Street. This project, among other things, will address that. Yeah, Bonnie.
If there's a financial consideration for an easement, where does that fund come from? Do we have to wait for another town meeting, or?
Yeah, that is. And I think it comes from Chapter 90 because that's the structure of the project funding, correct? Yeah. All right. And I think the estimate for there is a general estimate, because obviously there's a cost that's associated with the easements. But it kind of underscores the light footprint, if you will, for this entire project. Because again, I'm not a landowner who's affected by this, and I get that if you are, it's your property. I get that. The total cost that is projected is somewhere in the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 range. That's across the board. Now that's subject to appraisals and negotiation and all sorts of other things, but that's not for any easement. That's for all 122 easements. That's the entire footprint of the project and the likely expenditure that will be necessary to compensate for easements. So it's a significant project. It runs from Sears Road to Park Street, but the actual footprint in terms of people's property is going to be relatively minor, I think. Ms. Morris.
you're concerned about the disabled, which I am. I deal with disabled all the time. And you're eliminating parking along this area. Where are you gonna have these disabled people parked? Where are they supposed to park here to go to the community house? And if you have a wheelchair, are they supposed to park behind the townhouse to go to the funeral home if there's a deceased person that they want to see? Or going to Susan Stone's and she deals with disabled all the time. People, you're concerned about the disabled making the sidewalks available for them, but you're not supplying parking for these people, and I don't understand it. And you keep saying safety, but the safety is for these elderly people, and it's easier for them to park in front of a business than it is to go from the townhouse to our facility or Susan Stone's facility. And I don't you're making sidewalks for handicaps, but you're not allowing them to park anywhere close to where they need to go.
And Mr. Morris has had the opportunity at
Like I've said, I've been at these meetings, and you said earlier you've listened to our reasoning, and I've been told to be quiet in some of these meetings. I've heard enough from you, and I'm just trying to express myself to tell you folks that you're not listening to the needs of the property owners here.
Yes, sir.
I'm just looking at the plans, and I'm just curious about Common Street, and right here and directly in front of the library.
Yes.
That area that's being built out into the street.
Mm-hmm.
Could Common Street be maybe widened a little bit? And also, could you put parking all along Common Street?
There is parking along.
There is parking.
Like I see that there's a little section, probably a half of what we have right now.
Well, right now, Common Street's two ways, and when people are parked, you actually can't go two ways on the road. The road's becoming a one-way. They're changing the intersection so you can't kind of go up it as fast. So it's to slow traffic down a little bit. And there's about 180 feet of parking, I believe, on Common Street. So technically, by law, you're not allowed to park within 20 feet of an intersection. That's the code of the town of Southborough. So even so, a lot of the parking where it's allowed isn't technically legal parking. So it's just, I mean, and that's actually, I mean, 20 feet kind of a common. You're not allowed to park on a sidewalk. That's part of the code in the law.
Correct, even if you came 20 feet from the light.
If you went
In this
20 feet,
direction.
but then you'd be in the intersection technically.
If you made Common Street a one-way, you could still have parking 20 feet from the intersection, all the way up Common Street up to where it's, what's that, St. Mark Street?
And it was to make the intersection safer, just you could make a right-hand turn instead of having the wide, basically the veer off to the right is actually has to turn into a turn in order to slow people down and keep the traffic at a better pace going up Common Street.
In other words,
And that was the reasoning.
I'm just thinking about the part that's actually pushed out into the street.
Which is just to create that 90-degree intersection. That's what it's for.
With that right there, tied into the parking that you've created, could add at least maybe 3 or 4 more spaces.
I mean,
And going up to the other end, extending it all the way to St. Mark Street.
I think that it could. I mean, one of the things that's going to happen as a result of this this project, there are some trade-offs, and there is some parking that's good. There's no question that right now. Although honestly, I drive up and down, particularly the stretch from Park Street to Route 85 an awful lot, and I keep track. I've started to keep track of the number of times I see people parked on that area, on at least that stretch of it. It's not very often. And the area that you're describing, there are people parked there for certain events and functions. Most of the time there aren't cars there.
Right, but it's two-way now. If you made it one way, but
it is going to be one way.
Right, and then a little common area, even if you went a little bit into the common area there where that broken down pipe railing is, you could almost make it a one-way with parking on both sides of Common Street, possibly. And that might relieve some of the extra parking they might need at the funeral home and
Yeah,
immature.
you can't, from a historical standpoint, you can't do that on the left side because of the common itself. Yeah.
Well, you could make the entire right side parking.
Well, then you're dealing with a,
It's really an engineering design issue with the way of the safety to fix the intersection to make it safer and to allow parking. And they worked it as best they could, keep as much on the common, as much as at the Veterans Memorial as we could at that square.
we struggle with the issue. We struggle with it. We're not unmindful about it. I disagree with Mr. Morris saying that he didn't have the opportunity. I don't think anyone ever said you can't say anything else. You got your hand up again, I'm going to give you another chance. So I take offense at suggesting that at any of our meetings you were told to keep quiet. That never happened.
It did happen.
It did.
No, it didn't. So what do you have to say today again, Mr. Morris?
I did. I was told to be quiet. You've heard enough from me.
By who?
But I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus like I told you that before.
Okay.
Again, at Easter service here at the Pilgrim Church on Sunday, there were 14 cars parked along Common Street, or more. On Saturday, for the Easter egg hunt, I don't know if you drove up Main Street that morning, but there were cars parked all along Main Street in front of the community house, which is our community house. There were cars parked from 85 all the way up Common Street and all along Main Street for these kids to go to the community house. But you continue to say that we don't need parking in this area. And we do. I've lived in this town for 62 years, and I've seen it grow. I used to be able to sled down Middle Road without a worry about a car coming up when I was growing up. You can't do that anymore. The town has grown, and all as you're doing by insisting that we eliminate parking in this area, it's not just parking, and I'll talk later to the other people about taking my property, but this is a community that needs parking in this area. And
Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir.
My name is Ryan Torkelson. I'm Susan Stone's husband. And I don't understand why, like he's expressed, that you're going to totally eliminate the possibility of people parking. And particularly with Doc Stone, he's still on the planet. He needs access. And we have people that need access to that business. And when you eliminate the parking in front of the house, where do you expect they're going to park? Where are they going to go?
There is parking. It's one of the two places. One is on the west side of Middle Road. The other is on the east side of Middle Road, where an exception is being made for the parking rule, and it has to do with the business there for Dr. Stone. And there's parking there. There's parking there, and there's disability access. There's parking. The only place where there's not parking is where there can't be under state and federal safety regulations.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment. I don't know where this disability parking is going to be, because it's certainly not going to benefit disabled people if they're in a wheelchair, if they have to be able to wheel themselves up Middle Road. And then taking into consideration the traffic, that Middle Road has become a driveway for Faith School, and that there is no ability, none whatsoever, for when people are dropping off their kids, it is packed, both sides. There's no space for somebody to park. Yes, people can park in our driveway, but they can't park to obstruct the garage. And in front of the house, what you're proposing is that there is a sidewalk 9 feet in front of the living room window. 9 feet. So that would mean that as you're walking along, we're probably about this far away. So what you're doing is you're stripping that whole property of its value as a residence. Who would ever think of having a sidewalk 9 feet away and then taking out all the bushes, because the only way my dad can have his wheelchair ramp is if the ramp is right in front of the living room windows.
None of the sidewalks are on anything but public property.
That's, there is a, their easement is because right now the property and the current sidewalk are
Mhm.
lined up, and in order to get the parking spot in the sidewalk moves back.
So because of the parking spot, okay, all right,
Yeah,
so I stand corrected. To provide the parking spot, from a safety
You
perspective,
have to provide a parking spot, and there needs to be more parking. And the whole privacy issue, and it's not only that, it's a safety issue. What happens if a car, boom, comes right up? I mean, you literally put this project, now, what I'm beginning to understand is in this whole process of trying to get what you want, and having this project go through and widening Main Street and having these sidewalks, which is a good idea, but not wanting to tackle any issue of the historical nature of the common, whereas our 1732 house is no longer considered worthy of historical preservation. So not only do you ruin it as a residential property, because no one would ever consider, I certainly wouldn't consider having a sidewalk within 9 feet of the living room. You're ruining it as a residential property. You're devaluing it altogether. And the historical beauty of that home is deteriorated considerably because what I gather is not want to tackle taking a few more feet on the north side of the road and making the common slightly smaller, where you're going to have to redo the stone wall anyways.
We are moving it. I mean,
But
because we
Karen,
remember we fought that battle for a long time
we
with
didn't
with-
fight the battle. There wasn't really a battle.
We
You
did,
told me that you weren't going to take from our side of the road. You told me that you were going
Right,
to.
the original plan was to go
take
there,
from the
and
common.
it didn't get approved. It was fought by historical.
It was voted
It was
on in
voted by the-
2010
it was-
by the selectmen, the planning
Right.
all right,
board.
all right,
And
all right,
then-
Mr. Morris,
Historical.
Mr. Morris,
And then
Mr.
it
Morris, I
was-
recognize you. Other people are talking right now.
I certainly don't mind him making that comment because Stephen has really kept track of your actions, of your committee, and he has been putting in his voice with absolute consideration, and he's been voicing the concerns of many people. And
The
I'm
committee-
really glad that he's butting in.
I
Thank
mean,
you,
one thing
Stephen.
though is just the committee really wasn't in place when the decision was made. We had 3 sets, and I think you probably remember that. There were red, green, and blue. We had stakes that we had put
Yeah, the
in,
stakes we put
and
in,
when that
so-
was all done, and then that was finally, we had already had a different process that had been in place, and the planning board and the selectmen had agreed, and we had parking almost the whole way at that point. And then, as the project went on, and there were other complaints of people not liking the project as much, and it started going up in front of the selectmen, we went and we looked at the 3 different versions there, and when we did that, that was when it was decided this is the way it's gonna be. Historical at that point said, all right, fine, and everybody, that was where we went to, was that a little bit from the north, a little bit from the south, and that was how, and then we were gonna provide parking. The only thing that had changed with the Main Street Working Group at one point was that there wasn't gonna be any parking, and then they put that back.
Well-
But that was what had changed. I mean, but the Main Street Working Group didn't have anything to do with,
So
the lines were drawn out
So
prior to
what I don't
them becoming.
understand is, where was historical in terms, I mean, I know.
I don't know, I'm not on the committee,
Where
and
was
I don't know.
Historical's been at, let me just interrupt, Historical's been at a number of our meetings, and to the extent anyone has raised any issues from a historical perspective, they've addressed them. I mean, they have.
They haven't, they have not addressed the historical.
You weren't at the
part.
meetings. You weren't at the
Well,
meetings.
I certainly didn't know about the meetings, and no one even came and spoke to my dad, nor myself, about the impact of this until we got the certified letter about the meeting that happened a few weeks
Well,
ago.
I'm just talking about from
Prior to that, there
historical,
was no
I'm just
notification.
talking to you from a historical perspective. The meetings were posted, Historical was invited, they participated in our meetings, they made presentations, they weighed in on what could and couldn't be done with the common. That's the way the process is supposed to work, and the way the process did work.
I understand that, but I've just been really chagrined and dismayed at the lack of consideration that has been placed for the historical nature of the homes and the homeowners, the people that have been paying the taxes towards the town. And I really would have thought that we would have had a better representation for our value and our
Again,
property.
I'll just say
in this
that
process.
the working group probably has met 30 times in the 20 months or so that we've...
That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's mute at this point in time. We're talking
No,
about...
no, no.
what's
Well, let me
present.
explain in terms of, you said that people weren't heard. We probably met 30 times. We heard from homeowners, we heard from anyone who showed up and voiced their concerns. And to the extent a historical was raised, it was addressed. That doesn't mean there's a difference between agreeing with you and hearing you. And
I
we've
gather
heard
that.
we've heard various perspectives. We've taken into consideration various considerations. From a safety perspective, we heard from the chief of police, we heard from the fire department. All sorts of changes were made as a result of those considerations. So the suggestion, this is what I'm responding to, the suggestion that the working group didn't listen to people is completely wrong.
I didn't say that.
And quite frankly, you weren't at our meetings.
No, I know, and I
Steve.
did not say anything about during
Steve.
my hearing. I didn't say that. All I said was that no one came to the house and spoke to my dad and said, "Oh, by the way, look what we've got in store for you." No one mentioned it, and if I hadn't gone to that meeting, I don't think anyone would have still have informed us.
Okay, Steve, you had your hand up.
Thanks. I just want to chip in, as somebody who's sat on the Main Street working group as well. I think that this group has worked very hard to solicit input and to listen to people and hear people out. I don't think that the problem has been a lack of listening. The problem is that we have a very difficult situation where people's property is getting squeezed and there aren't solutions. And it does seem like the project has been in flux in that area over the past few months. You know, things like, questions about, as an example, the hydrant that's been on the common all along and whether that's being moved on the opposite side. So, things have changed there, but the fundamental problem is there, that this project financially impacts in a very negative way these parcels to the south side of Common Street. And I do want to mention that there is an alternative. If we vote to delay, not to approve this project at town meeting, to approve the easements, that doesn't mean that this project is dead. That we can say, we could have a special town meeting or something once these issues have been resolved. I just think that this is too big a conflict. I mean, if as a town we really want to run roughshod over these property owners and just take I don't think that the easement process is going to be able to compensate them for what's going on. I really think this town should do more in terms of studying what the parking situation there is and what other kinds of, and to really do some kind of creative thinking about how to deal with this problem.
Okay.
There aren't easy solutions because we would have found them already, but that doesn't mean that the problem is solved just because we haven't found a solution.
No, I hear you. Yeah, Claire.
Just a couple, three things. I'm Claire Reynolds. I'm also on the Main Street Design Committee. I live at 104 Main Street. I'm not affected at all with the project. A couple things. One, today I was coming up Middle Road to make a left-hand turn onto Main Street. There was a car parked in front of Stone's. I had to inch out and hope that somebody wasn't going over the speed limit and hit my front end. The parking there is extremely dangerous. The second thing is, one of the things that we never talked about, and I just thought of it here, is, I don't know, isn't it, so to speak, the responsibility of a business to provide their own handicap parking? I don't know, but for the for businesses to expect that the town has to provide the handicap parking. I think it's a business responsibility. I mean, we've had a situation where the police have, so to speak, overlooked parking on the sidewalk. If I pulled my car up on the sidewalk in front of Morrow's, where there's actually a physical sidewalk, somebody would come by and tag me for doing that. So just because we've had these quasi sidewalks that the police have allowed parking to take place in doesn't really mean that that was something that should have been done all along. And the last thing is I actually witnessed about a year and a half, I think it'll actually be 2 years in June. I was on Main Street traveling west. I stopped behind a car who was at a dead stop to take a left onto Middle Road. He waited till the cars went by, started to take a left-hand turn. A guy came flying down on a bike. He hit that guy. The guy was seriously injured, and it was not the driver's fault. He just couldn't see with the parked cars and the shadows. He could just not see it. So that's just my comment.
And what Claire has just recounted was you know, a big part of our discussion. And Steve, I don't disagree with you. You were there for the discussions. That there are impacts in terms of parking. No one's saying that there's not. There's no question that that's the case. But those are unsafe intersections. And they're not unsafe just by people's opinions. They're unsafe by state regulations and federal requirements. They're unsafe. And so the balance is someone's convenience as opposed to parking 20 feet away versus people getting hit by cars because intersections are unsafe. For our committee, that was a very, very easy call. Yeah.
So I'd like to point out 3 things, which you could take or leave, doesn't matter how you want it, however you want to see it. One thing is that I think that a lot of you out here are looking for some kind of way to be able to, especially people that are directly affected, have some way of possibly being able to negotiate or change something that's on the plans that affects you personally. So maybe it's as simple as, for now, I know the engineers have already made these plans, they probably wouldn't want to redo them at this point, but at least maybe bubbling a certain area on the plan and simply saying it's to be, you know, basically it's to be negotiated, determined still that area. That way the rest of the project can still go forward. And then for both the businesses that are right here on Main Street, I personally, I don't know because I don't use either businesses, but I mean, hopefully I won't have to use that anytime soon. But but I still see some kind of this area. I'm still thinking back to this. The second issue is that I'm still thinking about this area on Common Street as that might be a way to alleviate some of the burden that these businesses have. If Common Street could have parking spaces all along it, it's still close enough that people, you know, could get there. I know it's not going to be as easy as if they're right in front of the business, but it still would provide some, rather than just having this small section of Common Street and actually bumping the street, bumping this little island out into the current street. You could potentially add more parking by even coming this way towards the library. Not getting rid of the whole lawn in front of the library. Only the width enough to park a car there. If you came this way a little bit, then you could still have parking from whatever the minimum required distance is, 20 feet, all the way up.
I hear you, and these were part and parcel of our discussions. You're
Right.
talking about a very small number of parking spaces. You're talking about an area where certainly people park there. There's parking behind the townhouse. There's parking at the library. There's parking at Woodward School.
Right.
Most people, that's not a difficult walk. So to the extent you're talking about the number of people who are going to be affected because they literally can't walk, you're talking about a small number of people. And you're talking about a small number of parking spaces.
But it is really convenient, a lot more convenient to be on Common Street than to be behind the library or one of the schools.
I agree. I agree. And I'm someone who might be affected by that. But those are the sort of balances we went through in terms of again, safety considerations, not impacting from a historic. Actually, it wasn't a balance from a historical perspective. We really can't do that because you've got to get sign off both at a community level and a state level to not adversely impact the common.
Okay, so I think the third thing is that what specifically could, I think a lot of people here want to know, what specifically could they do for the piece that's affecting them directly? Could it be bubbled on the plans to be determined, to be negotiated somehow with that current landowner? What's the process that they need to go through to get something changed on the plans?
Well, there's two. I guess there's a number of different things. Number one, and I've not put that question specifically to folks at the state, but I've had pretty extensive conversations with people at the state, and and in this respect, I disagree a little bit with what Steve said about the actions not adversely affecting the project, because not surprisingly, there is a dogfight for funding. I mean, this is state and federal money to do a $6 to $7 million project.
Is it an all or nothing? Like it has to be these plans or nothing?
No. Well, yes and no. I mean, for purposes of where we are in the queue right now, and the reason that originally we were talking about having a special town meeting in the fall, and the state with the idea of, again, somewhat naive in our standpoint, we have a special town meeting in the fall. Then we go to bidding in November, December, and we start the project according to the timeline I talked about earlier. And what the state said is that no, you've got an additional process you have to go through for the various appraisals and for dealing with the easement questions and potential negotiations and eminent domain. And so they're the ones who didn't recommend. They said it's not going to happen if you have a special town meeting in October. And the other thing, and so that's why we happen to have a regular town meeting coming up in April, so that's when the warrant article is on. If that warrant article doesn't pass in April, is the project dead? Well, I mean, you can always reapply. You could always possibly have a special town meeting and squeeze it into the time frame. But people need to understand that a no vote at the April town meeting really jeopardizes where we are in the queue. And instead of a project starting in 2017, it could be 3 years, 5 years, or never. Or the town pays $6 or $7 million. So I understand that there are issues on the other side, but there are large issues on if this project is going to be done, we can't be fanciful about the fact that 2 years of work to get us to this point can simply be redone at the snap of our fingers if the article is voted down in April. There will be severe consequences. My expectation is that
Marty, can I just ask you what your basis for that?
My conversations with the folks at the state. They're the ones, again, originally we had a town meeting scheduled in October. They said that will not work.
Did they say that this project would drop off the tip list?
Oh yeah, well, it wouldn't drop off the list. It would drop off our place in the queue. And there's a lot of towns that are behind us in the queue right now. So we lose our place in terms of funding.
Can I just speak to that, kind of what you were saying, is that through this whole process as we've been going through, the town definitely, when we were in front of the selectmen, when the Main Street Works Group, they're really committed to trying to help the businesses as best we can. We're trying not to impact them as much as possible, but through the easement process, where we can't really talk money, we can't really negotiate easements unless we're permitted. But the thing is once that permission comes, there's no reason the town can't help these businesses try to deal with the parking in a different way. It would have to be on private property. It has to be with money that is not federally or come from state. It has to be the town has to want to help them and do this. But the thing is if the town selectmen have said, look, try to work out what we can. Try to help these businesses. Nobody wants to see people fail. It's not something. But the thing is, until we can get into the process, you can't come up with really what. All right, this is actually the value, but we can do this much other stuff. You can't get there because we don't have the information and we don't have the permission to do it. But there's no
And it wouldn't
reason-
come from the state or federal money.
Right. It would be.
It would have to be the town would have to make a decision that they were going to affirmatively help private property owners with town funds.
So again, what are the steps?
Well, that's,
Like
I
one,
guess,
two,
that's
three.
all it can be, is it's the only way to have it, because we've really gone over these plans quite a bit. We've looked at all the different options, and
So right now it's this or nothing?
right now, this is what the plan is, unless, like I said, everything you kind of come up with, we've talked about at the meeting, because unfortunately, there's
Have
really.
they talked about taking land from the library to add parking all the way up the street?
We looked over and over again, because the Main Street Working Group looked quite a bit at not changing the intersection of Common Street and Main Street on the eastern side, because Common loops the Common. And so they looked at that, but ultimately to make a safer design, to make the traffic slow, because a lot of people in town who are in favor of the project, one worry they have is that you're gonna start having people flying through town and speeding and a lot of the things we had heard early on, even though those might have gone away somewhat now, originally there was concern, and one of the safest ways and the ways to slow down traffic and to make it a safe intersection is you make a 90-degree intersection. So we were pressed very hard to make sure that the Park Street intersection did that and didn't become just a veer off, and that it was actually, it's not a fork in the road, it's actually a right-hand turn, where you slow down. And that's what we did at Common Street. And it's there for safety reasons. I understand you might get 2 or 3 more parking spots, but at the expense of some safety with the intersection and dealing with other issues of the traffic speeds that people are concerned about. So that's how that worked out. We really hashed through it quite a bit of times, and ultimately that was where we came from. And as I said, through with meetings with the selectmen and the Main Street Working Group, and the Main Street Working Group meets with the selectmen committed that they want to help, they don't want to have anybody fail, because we stop people from parking on the sidewalk. So they're basically saying, what can we do to help? And the thing is at this point, with the way the plans are, and it's a good set of plans, and they're a good, solid, safe corridor on Main Street now, that for pedestrians, bicycles, and cars, at this point, this is a good set of plans. There's compromises all around, but to do anything more, we need to actually look in the easement process and see what we can do. And I mean, the town's been looking at getting a pathway from the library up to Pilgrim Church, because there's a lot of people going to Pilgrim Church. Is there a better way that we can do that next to the cemetery? Is there a better way to get people from the library parking lot instead of the little path? We're looking at all this. It's not part of the project. It's stuff that we're going to have to do as a town in order to make this whole area. This is the downtown. It should be walkable. There shouldn't be problems with people getting around it. We have the sidewalk going down to Woodward now on the eastern side of 85, so that if you're at the Woodward parking lot, or you're parking along Woodward and you want to get up to Community House, you don't have to go up the pathway. You can actually walk on the sidewalk. You can get to Main Street, you can get to St. Mark's Field, you can get over to Library. Right now, we really don't have that in any kind of convenience, and this is bringing a lot to this area, and unfortunately, at the expense, absolutely, of of perceived spaces that really aren't spaces. And I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, because we've talked about it. Well, what if people weren't on the sidewalk, could they park? If you really look at the code, there's really only about 60 feet that would be legal parking in this whole area, to not be an intersection, to not be creating enough of a choke that you didn't have two-way traffic. So the reality is we're actually providing more spaces than are legal right now. We're providing legal spaces that should be safe, that should be good for residents to feel safe walking by. They're not going to feel like they're going to get hit, walking on the sidewalk, someone's going to park on it, and they're going to end up out in the road, because that does happen now. But as part of the negotiation of the easements, I mean, I want to help people as much as possible so that everyone's in a good spot. And I mean, not what do they say? Like, the best compromise is when everybody's a little unhappy, right? I mean, that's what I would like to be in that spot that we understand we've done the best we can, and we've really worked as best we can. But the only opportunity to do that is really through the easement process, and really, okay, we end up with this permanent easement of a sidewalk on someone's front yard. Absolutely. There's there might be other things that we can do in order to create a better, some sort of parking or help with parking somewhere because of that. But unfortunately, the state, and I've talked to them a bunch of times about it because the Main Street Working Group was trying to figure it out, and they said, what can we do? The state will not pay to put parking on private land. They won't do it, so the town will have to take that on, and that'll be fine. I think we want to look at trying to help and fix what we can. But that's the only step right now that we can really go to and keep it private.
Yes, sir.
To my way of thinking, it still has not been answered adequately. How do you propose to get Doc Stone out of the house if you wipe out the ability to park in front of the house? This gentleman cannot be wheeled a half a block down the way just to get in the car. There's something you guys haven't addressed. That's my opinion.
I understand.
And it's
And
unsafe. You talk
there is
about
parking,
unsafe.
there is parking contiguous to the house.
Voted
Not the way
to
the ramp goes.
reconsider that and voted to put parking from that curb up to the Face School driveway. It's parking.
There is. I mean,
I mean,
Well,
if
you
it's a
don't
matter
care.
of needing
no,
a handicap
there is parking. It is contiguous to the residence. It is,
One spot.
No,
One
four
spot.
places.
yeah.
Face School.
Yeah, it's not a single spot.
Right? Right?
Is it 4?
Yeah.
There are 4 parking spots, right, contiguous to the Stone property.
And so Stone, you have to go down your ramp, go all the way back, and then get into the car that way.
Well, if they need if they needed a handicap ramp or something, that's stuff that can be added.
As part of the project.
Yeah, right up against the living room window.
This is to address Karen. Is it a fact that this project was not in the downtown? This is our town center, the downtown area. The reason the downtown center wasn't included in this was because you didn't want to change the parking facilities down here?
No, that's not true.
If you went by the 20 feet that you're talking about here, you'd have about 3 parking spots downtown for the businesses down there.
When we get to the downtown, they will have to probably pull a couple spots. That's not a question. If you look at how Park Street
But if
works,
you're doing the downtown area.
we are doing the downtown.
Which is going to be the town and our town paying for it, correct?
That will be Chapter 90 money, so it'll be
Right.
reimbursable by the state.
But you don't have to go by the state and federal regulations there, correct?
The intersection and everything, absolutely. In order to get it approved, we will have to
So
have the approval
so
of the
when they
plan.
do that, you won't be able to park within 20 feet of a crosswalk or an intersection or?
Right, well, it's 10 feet to a crosswalk, it's 10 feet to a hydrant, 20 feet to an intersection.
So you're
But
gonna-
the intersection is Park Street down there is the only intersection.
I understand that, but there's a crosswalk in front of Morrow's, there's a crosswalk
Right.
across from, so you're talking,
Right, they'll have to bump out.
so you're gonna eliminate the
And-
parking for the businesses down there also?
There'll end up being a bump out, which will probably stop in order to make, because we have a lot of complaints about that crosswalk down there, so we actually, that's something that we do need to look at improving the safety of, because I have complaints all the time about the fact that people don't think that crosswalk's safe, because the cars are parked and you kind of can't get out to the side of the car before you're trying to cross, so that's where likely it would be like the crossing near your rental, where it kind of comes out so that the handicap ramp is out and the cars stop at the ramp and you're standing up on the sidewalk.
Is it
still
possible
doing-
to put that ramp on the other side of the driveway? Put the bump out and the ramp on the other side of the driveway instead of on the west side, do it on the east side of the driveway? Good Lord, you're at our front door anyway, so you might as well put the walk there.
We can look at that, I don't know. That wasn't something we looked at. If we could move the crosswalk to the east side of the driveway, so east instead of west.
That's correct.
East instead of west. At the I'll show you.
Okay, I suspect people want to talk about anything else. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground on this parking issue. I suspect there might be a stone or two that hasn't been uncovered, but not too many. And we've got some property owners who haven't had a chance to talk to the engineers, and I think you said you wanted to leave relatively early, that you've enjoyed the show. And so are there any more questions on any of the general subjects before people we'll have the opportunity to talk to the engineers and to Karen specifically about issues they might have with their property. Yeah, Bonnie.
Will you be making a presentation at town meeting as you did this evening to explain the process?
Yeah, you know, much to my chagrin, I'm going to be in Texas that night, so I think that's probably going to fall to Mr. Shea. Claire doesn't think it's to my chagrin, but it is.
Well, the
Yeah.
process would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I think it's going to fall to. Yeah, I think it's going to fall to Brian Shea, who has the advantage of obviously being on the Board of Selectmen, and he was part of the working group. But unfortunately, I'm out of state that night. All right, thank you, TV Land, and thanks for your patience, everybody.
Thank you.